Okay, thanks so much for coming this morning. My name is Julianne Pearce and I'm the executive producer of Blast Theory, and this session is called Cinema in the Streets, location-based in mobile technologies. And we have a really fantastic panel this morning, Shari Frilo, Patrick Crowe and my colleague from Blast Theory, Matt Adams. But before we sort of launch into the presentations, I thought I'd just give a bit of sort of context and background to this panel. I proposed this panel to DocFest to sort of tie in with a Blast Theory work that is here this year called Ulrike and Eamon Compliant, which is an audio walk with mobile phones, which actually starts today at midday and runs till Saturday. So I really encourage you all to get to see that. But in this work, we're really, I guess, thinking about what is cinema in the age of sort of multiple screens, and what is the sort of challenge for cinema from sort of interactivity and sort of location-based mobile. So Matt is going to talk in more detail about that. But I guess all of us would be aware that the sort of take-up of sort of mobile devices and especially smartphones is sort of currently astronomical, and predictions are that by 2015 more than 2 billion people worldwide will own a smartphone. So which is sort of basically quadrupling what that is now. So I just thought, instead of a show of hands who has a screen with them, I'd be really interested in a show of screens. So how many sort of mobile screens, sort of smartphones, iPads, just hold them up high? Okay, so there's, probably everyone here has some sort of, more than one, carrying, at least one mobile screen with them. So, obviously this is having an impact on, how we view video, how we view cinema, our relationship to cinema. So in this panel, we really want to look at, I guess, what is the impact of these technologies on cinema and on narrative and storytelling, and especially the audience. What does this shift in how we experience film and cinema through mobile devices, how does that shift the relationship of the audience to storytelling? So we're going to have 3 presentations, but I have about 15 minutes each from Shari, then Patrick and Matt, and then following that, I think we'll have about sort of half hour of discussion. So, and I think also we'll save questions until the end, unless you've got something sort of really burning that you'd like to ask. So I'm really pleased to introduce Shari Frilo, who Blast Theory met this year through the New Frontier program. We had our new work there, A Machine to See With, and it was a fantastic experience to be involved in New Frontier. And Shari has been with Sundance Film Festival for 12 years, I think, and is a really sort of vital force in I guess, bringing interactive and new modes of filmmaking to Sundance through New Frontiers. So, over to you, Shari.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the panel, and good morning. Well, I guess I'll just take up the challenge as it was set out in the program, the program that brought you here, I suppose, which is, does the current emergence of new forms of media mobility deliver the promise of a cinematic experience that is multidimensional and participatory? There's a lot of kinds of experiences that this media landscape delivers, but if the hallmarks of the cinematic experience is that it's visual and it moves through time, that it delivers a sense of immersion and transports one to another world, if it delivers this chance of walking in the shoes of another and experiencing something that you might not have otherwise, then I'd say the answer would be a resounding yes. And certainly, given some of the work that has come through New Frontier in the past years. And I'll explain to you what New Frontier is. Sundance Film Festival is a discovery festival. We have a number of sections in the festival. New Frontier is one of them. It's had been traditionally a section where we would show films that push the boundaries of form and storytelling. Would show experimental films there, but also films that really just take a lot of risks that may not be characterized as experimental in the traditional sense, which is kind of an oxymoron. But, so about 5 years ago, 2007, we re-inaugurated the section as New Frontier. So in addition to the films, we now build a showcase and basically build out a venue so that it would house New Frontier, which is sort of like a festival inside the festival. It's open free to the public, and it's meant to platform cinematic works at the crossroads of the art world, the worlds of new media technology, and the film world. It's set up as a social space. Oftentimes there's an installation lounge with couches, and it's kind of meant to seduce the body and envelop the body as we're kind of putting these new and uncommon cinematic works to the audience. And there's a micro cinema where we also present performances that engage with the moving image. We were moved to do this. It was kind of percolating actually since 2002, 2003. Really kind of moved by an underground movement of cinema, but at the same time also how the digital technologies were changing the landscape. And I think right around YouTube, it was when we started to really get very seriously, around 2004, we started to get very serious about New Frontier. And started the performance part of it, and then in 2007, a full-on showcase that's kind of a mini festival inside the festival. So the question of how, now that we've got this new landscape, and I often think about this landscape as not something separate from our bodies, but something very much an evolution of our bodies. I often talk about it as the electroskeleton. It is the extension of our bodies in addition to buildings, now we have an electronic structure that follows our bodies. It's an immersive environment that we actually choose and craft around our bodies, and we go through space and time with it. This electroskeleton has a number of different roles, but certainly a lot of it has to do with delivering or the ability or the opportunity for media to be a point of contact, and is now rapidly becoming a point of language, how we actually communicate to one another through electrons, but also through the moving image. So I really see the role of the filmmaker, the storyteller who engages with the moving image as expanding now beyond just what film is, but to just how we operate every day, how we talk to each other every day. The way that the artists I see though, is, and I'll focus on New Frontier and the works that have come through, and I'll present one really kind of shining example of something that came through this year. But over the course of the years, since 2007, I've really seen artists take on the challenge of this new landscape in terms of storytelling in a very interesting way. What I see them doing is they're migrating, and I come from a film festival background, so I see them migrating the way that they conceive of the framework of their craft, of storytelling, where it used to be, and it still is, and will continue to be vitally, the traditional framework of storytelling where it's a linear format, it's uniplatforms, platforming one screen, or it's designed so that you interact with one screen, and it aims to enter the eyes, to envelop the imagination and give a sense of immersion in that way by really kind of taking out the body. Where this other, this other landscape is multi-platform, and it surrounds the body as it moves through time. And the filmmakers in this framework aim to engage the body as well as the imagination. And draw the interaction of the social mind, which is, I think, is probably the biggest shift in the framework. is to engage the social mind. That's where we get, works that are interactive, that are participatory, and that are just straight up social, that need other people involved with it, even if it's not just you and the work. So it's been sort of seeing this kind of percolate up through New Frontier over the years. I thought I'd maybe show one. The very first, in fact, one of the driving motivations to start in 2007 was the advent of mobile media in 2007. And Shuli Chang was an artist that was in that edition of New Frontier with a piece called Moby Opera. And that was when she she basically distributed phones where people with the phones would film and upload the work into a timeline that told a story of the festival in a kind of conglomerate, sort of like one of the first crowdsourcing pieces that I actually don't remember. But I'm sure there was much more before. Matthew Moore's Digital Farm Collective, his work, Urban Plow, he's a farmer who actually films his crops and then takes those films and installs them in supermarkets so that when you go and buy broccoli, you can actually see the broccoli grow in the farm. So transporting the location of the farm to our point of contact as consumers to perhaps enrich our relationship with the things that we're consuming. It's a very lovely piece, very kind of straightforward. It's not in real time, but this is how this thing is sort of I've been seeing it evolve. And groups like Graffiti Research Lab, I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're these terrible hacker, really wonderful group that finds ways to use digital technology to tag things. And maybe it's worth showing a quick clip of what they do when we had New Frontier.
Okay, go ahead.
The places what you were using there is the letters laser, that means light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation.
So that's just a quick example of their work, and we had that piece at Sundance. Does this impart a sense of the cinematic? I think this is sort of an evolution of works that I've been seeing that are kind of getting at it. But I think there's a definite evolution toward creating story worlds that are truly immersive and compelling and transporting. And we had two of them at New Frontier this year, one of which I will let Matt talk about. It was kind of a co-commission that creatively did with Banff New Media Center and the 01 San Jose Festival for Arts on the Edge for a piece of locative cinema. But one thing I will show you now is Lance Weiler. Lance Weiler is a filmmaker, a gamer, and an all-around transmedia groundbreaking figure. He's a really interesting artist, and he's working on a project right now called Pandemic. It's transmedia to the core. Part of it is a feature film that he's working right now with Ted Hope, This and That Productions. But what he's, the his mode of working is very interesting in that as he works, the R&D actually engages with exhibition as it did with New Frontier last year. He's creating a story world about a virus that affects adults, makes them sleep and go crazy, kind of weird zombies, and it leaves children to their own devices. What he brought to Sundance at New Frontier last year, 2011, this year, was a short film, as well as a multiplayer game with the challenge of 120 days to stop the pandemic. I'll show you 3 minutes of the film right now. That's a 3-minute clip of a 9-minute short film that quite well represents what the scenario is, what the setting is. And he extended this into the campus at large of the festival through this multiplayer game that involved 2 galleries, one of which was a mission control that ended up that essentially was a data visualization that visualized all of the data that was coming in about the virus, this proposed virus that was on the campus, and the information was coming through 5,000 water bottles that were circulating. It was coming through 50 Google phones that were being passed from person to person with a power hand crank. It was coming through online participants that were helping people on the festival looking for artifacts that were left behind by the adults to be migrated back to mission control. And there was a Microsoft Surface unit at mission control that was sort of integrating all of this information He also had made an app that, I don't think we'll have time to show it, but I can show it to you if you want to afterwards. That is essentially a really kind of clever app to photograph a room 360 degrees. And you didn't really even know you were stepping into the story world with this app. It's just a really clever thing that they stitch on the back end into 360. But once you've downloaded it, you've actually entered into his pandemic story world. And things will start to pop up in that app that relate to what's happening with the pandemic. And sometimes you'll find a gun or a knife or a marking to tell you if it's been touched by the epidemic or not. So this is a storyteller that's effectively using take to build a story world that engages the imagination as well as the body, and lets you make choices and ethical decisions within the world, and also come in and out to engage with the story.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. And I think you'll agree that it's fantastic to see this initiative from Sundance, and that film festivals are really taking sort of digital media and interactive media seriously. And I think we really see the evidence of that here at Sheffield. So I'm really pleased to introduce to you now the fantastic Patrick Crowe. And Patrick is based in Toronto and is a producer, writer, game designer and filmmaker. He runs the award-winning Xenophile Media. Some of you may have seen him speak yesterday at Crossover Summer. And Xenophile are a production company that designs and builds cross-platform strategies for television, documentaries, dramatic series, and non-broadcast digital media. So Patrick's going to give us an overview of some of Xenophile's current projects.
Hi everyone. I've been working in this field of cross-platform media for about a decade, well, more than a decade now. I started out mainly working in documentary and got very poor doing that, and sort of did a little sideways step into interactive media, and got very interested in the idea of extended fiction and extended documentary formats too, and we've done quite a bit of work in that field. I'm going to mainly just show a bunch of videos because that's much easier than giving you carefully considered insight. I think one of the things that really inspired me in this area that we work in, and that I still think underlies a lot of our work, is in fact the idea of site-specific narrative that is that is immersive in ways that we were only able to toy around a little with towards some eventual holodeck-style immersive experience. One of the things that really inspired me when I was working in this field early on was an art installation that a Baltimore-based artist called Terry Rube did at the Banff New Media Institute in the Rocky Mountains, where we hiked up mountain tops with GPS-enabled laptops on our backs, and it hooked up to headphones that were triggering a soundscape and audio clips as we progressed through this landscape, and it sort of offered reflections on death and the migration of the soul after death, which, as you hiked higher and higher and the oxygen got lower and lower, it really screwed around with your perception of reality, and was a very immersive experience and very cool. We've done a lot of work in alternate reality games that do this kind of that like to hint at that kind of experience where the narrative exists on multiple screens, from one screen to the next. Work that's been principled on the sort of this is not a game principle, where the narrative reaches out, from the TV into different media and across different platforms, and arguably is aimed at a target demographic of paranoid schizophrenics who think the TV's talking to them, and now it actually is. Yeah, it's a big market, right? And we've been, and then increasing, I guess. So what I'm getting into is just there's a sort of tension in our work between work that is a dispersed narrative and the kind of immersion that comes through dispersing a narrative across different platforms, and the focusing of imagination and the suspension of disbelief into experiences that are more single screen. And I'm just gonna, it permeates all our work, so I'm just gonna give you a preview of some of our more recent work that isn't very well known, and just sort of talk a bit about it. And then I'm gonna evolve, this is actually going somewhere though, because I'm gonna evolve into talking about one of our new projects that's very site-specific and exciting in my mind. This is Sanctuary. That's an interactive game that we integrated into a big budget sci-fi series that I'm going to reference a little later. And we do stuff in a variety of genres, obviously from kids animation to high-end live action and documentary.
MI9 regulations require that all potential recruits complete the following...
This is an adapted alternate reality game that we did for BBC, 2 seasons of it, that's had very big uptake. This is a feature documentary and an online documentary for kids that's on CBC in Canada right now. This is Love Letters to the Future. It's an alternate reality game and a user-generated content site sending messages of love and hope into the future. It opened at the Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change and involves an ARG with messages coming back from the future. And that's our top-rated thing that's got 10 million players around the world right now. It's called Total Drama Island, totally interactive. And as our distributor says, it's a great gimmick. So much for cutting analysis of our cutting-edge interactivity. So I'm going to show you an example of one project in particular that I'll just walk through briefly. Well, the video will walk through it. It's a project called Leica's Journey, which is connected to a documentary series called Empire of the Word, which is about the history of the written word. And it's we sort of based it on an Emmy Award-winning alternate reality game we did some years ago for Disney called Fallen. And it's a story that follows a girl's journey around the world. And there are mobile aspects of it that take place in 5 different cities of the world. And basically what we did, of course, for the home users, we mocked up this mobile experience to give an approximation of what it would be like. It was produced by us for TV Ontario, which is the educational broadcaster.
Join Empire of the Word online and uncover a 2,000-year-old mystery spanning continents, languages, and civilizations. Empire of the Word Online is a multimedia experience combining an 8-part live-action online drama with interactive games and puzzles that draw the players inside the narrative. The interactive experience accompanies a 4-part TV series, Empire of the Word, based on Alberto Manguel's A History of Writing. The TV series and the online experience deal with the history and power of the written word and the struggle for freedom of expression around the world. Themes that are explored in original interviews with dissident writers discussing censorship and freedom of speech.
The secret is, they just wanted to kill me.
Players follow a young heroine, Leica, through an online video mystery as she attempts to find and reveal a mysterious document. For 2,000 years, the contents of the Baba Sutra manuscript have been suppressed, its pages scattered across the known world. Hidden and buried, its translators exiled or killed. Legend calls it a cursed document. Each episode contains a clue that reflects a pivotal moment in the history of the written word. Filmed in Canada, Egypt, Germany, Turkey, India, and Britain, the online drama travels to some of the most important sites in the history of writing. In Egypt, we glimpse the genius of the ancient Arab world.
Are you here for something specific?
No.
In Berlin, we encounter one of the darkest chapters in history.
I think you have been followed.
In London, we are thrown into an electronic puzzle that draws on the player's knowledge of modern literature.
Well of loneliness.
The video chapters move seamlessly from live action to games and back again. In-game websites, blogs, and forums allow the players to come together with the characters from the story to discover the mystery of the Baba Sutra. Through the forum, players contribute to the story, find missing pieces of the Baba Sutra, and can communicate with its champion, dissident writer I.P. Burroughs. Players post clues alongside characters for the mystery and writers whose names appear as anagrams. As we follow Leica's adventure, we are immersed in a mystery in which word puzzles, real historical events, monuments, and current events mingle with an exploration of the written word. Go to eotwonline.ca for the full story.
One of the projects in the reel I showed you earlier that we did last year was called Sanctuary and Beyond. It's a big budget sci-fi series that we created a series of extended adventures for. And then one of the things we did for it, which was we were creating some mobile prototypes. One that was just a simple video download that offered EPK footage. And the other one that we did actually was, there we go, was a geolocative app that we did for iPhone and Android. And this is a little bit of footage from the prototype of the property that we skimmed to create this. That sort of took the gameplay for this very cult series sort of out into the streets, and which was quite separate from the main episodic interactive gameplay. But we thought this was really a kind of fun experiment that we did. And basically what happens is, stop, sorry guys. Basically what happens with this thing, here, let me get back here, is it's downloading, you can see the image on the left. It basically takes an image of, from a satellite image of where you are, projects your own location and the location of other players around you. And then this series, Sanctuary, is about abnormal mutants who live among us. So it projects all the images of the monsters that you need to find all around you, and then you run around trying to capture them either on your own or with friends. And it had, like, and then when you find them, the monsters pop up and you have a score and all that kind of thing. But it did okay it's available on the App Store. It's called Sanctuary Abnormal Hunt. And, but we thought it would be really neat to look at how kids would respond to this kind of experience. And of course, you can't do the same thing with kids. You can't project a game piece anywhere because it can't, arbitrarily be put across the 6-lane motorway, next to the sex offender's backyard in the piranha-infested pond. So we've come up, but we're integrating it into a property that's evolving in a really interesting direction. Not by doing that kind of gameplay, but by simulating a geolocative gameplay. So in this case, it's a property we've been involved with that we're developing our own property called Time Tremors, which is a mobile and online game for kids, a treasure hunt in the real world around you. And in this case, what happens is kids, it's a combination of things. Kids run in circles and do other kind of movements to open up a time tremor, which spews the game pieces out. And certain modules of this story take place in cultural institutions and other historic sites. So there's also that geolocative, site-specific component that still exists. And this is something that's underway right now. We're just financing it as a Canada-UK co-production, actually, with a company in London called Digital Outlook that was very interested in the potential to take these kind of experiences into museums and galleries. And our Canadian partner that we're prototyping this with is the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is one of the important galleries in North America, one of the leading ones. It's just had a really fascinating and excellent renovation by Frank Gehry, which is, and so they're just totally interested in getting people into the space in new ways, as many museums are. Interestingly enough, when we were originally really pushing this project for television, and it was not getting traction. It's as you'll see, it's probably a little high concept. And actually, what happened was when we took the idea of creating a mobile game. Some years later, as the project evolved and basically revisioning it as a mobile game, TV suddenly got very interested, and now they've commissioned a TV pilot. So we're building the game and revisioning it as a TV pilot. There it is. So this is a story about, just to briefly go through it, a brother and sister, Max and Meaty, who get sent away to a school on a mysterious island where they get into conflict with the evil school teacher, Miss Bugley, who has all the kids frightened in a web of fear. And it turns out that the reason is she's really a demon from another dimension who feeds on fear, and the school's built on the site of a time tremor, which is a hole in time. And that's the context for the mobile game. So let me see, without making you look at another trailer. Sorry, I'll skip forward a bit. There we are. There we are. So Time Tremors now is it's going to be a TV property of interstitial short episodes that promote a mobile world and a scavenger hunt that's enabled using mobile apps and trading cards. And the concept here is there's a variety of fantastic objects called the Time Treasures that have been scattered throughout time. They're very important to history, and they've been scattered throughout time, hidden in a different dimension of time, invisible to the human eye, but you can use the mobile app or the trading cards to collect these objects. And then they're being collected in order to open up this magical book called the Celestial Atlas, which recounts the story of Time Tremors. So Time Tremors takes part partly in the real world, taking kids out into their own environments to find these objects, and then on the other hand, it takes place partly in museums and participating cultural institutions where there are site-specific, customized treasure hunts, basically, operating under the premise that objects in the collection of these institutions are the game pieces that need to be discovered. And it also involves a series of trading cards, as I mentioned, that's part of and a lot of use of augmented reality with respect to the trading cards and with respect to finding the objects in real time.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Like this, so this is designed for kids.
Yes.
So, but what do they need to access it? Do they need to have smartphones to access?
That's the sort of high-end version of the story. This is just a walkthrough of how it might work at a gallery or museum. So we're actually appealing to mom and dad who want to give the kids please shut up and do this thing experience when they're at the gallery, which there's a lot of documented evidence and market need for. So yeah, the high-end version of it that we're selling the innovation concept of does use high-end smartphones. But as I said, there's also a different version of it that's online, and another one that uses trading cards too. So it's not exclusively for smartphone use. But I find in a lot of our work, we're bridging the gap constantly. The tension is between the potential of what's possible with new technology and high-end devices and the reality about what most people actually have access to. And that's you know, part of, some of the time we're always financing things but through the potential, but having to look very practically at what's available right now.
Okay, I think that's I think it's a fantastic overview of, you know, what Xenophile are currently working on, but I think, you know, as a company they've always pushed cross-platform work, and I think and we can, I think, look at this in the question time. Patrick's, you know, his work was site-specific and geolocative, you know, apps, and I think, you know, they were really pushing the envelope of what can be done, and I think that, you know, this is probably what's confronting a lot of sort of production companies and documentary filmmakers, is that, I guess, integration of apps and games and online and TV, and, you know, I think how, you know, it'd be really interesting to perhaps open it up to the floor in terms of how you're approaching that, and whether that is a pressure on you as filmmakers. So I'm really pleased now to introduce Matt Adams. Thanks to Patrick, fantastic presentation. And Matt Adams is an artist who founded the company Blast Theory 20 years ago, and Blast Theory is a company that makes performances, installations, games and interactive artworks. Blast Theory is renowned for its multidisciplinary approach, pioneering the use of new technologies within performance contexts. And as I mentioned before, shameless self-promotion, Ulrike and Eamon Compliant is at DocFest for the next 3 days, and it's the starting point is at the Winter Gardens, and it's a free work, and just please, I encourage you to participate in it. And Matt is going to tell you more about it.
Thanks a
Over
lot.
to you.
First of all, just to sort of introduce a little bit about Blast Theory. We're a group of artists, primarily. That's how we see the work that we make, and we primarily show in artistic contexts, but we try and work across different platforms. And today I'm going to talk about two works, A Machine to See With, which is the project that Shari mentioned that we premiered in San Jose last year and showed at Sundance earlier this year, and this work, Ulrike and Eamon Compliant. Given the kind of brief of this panel, I sort of thought it would be interesting just to reflect a little bit on sort of the kind of insanity of talking about cinema outside of cinemas, really. You know, we think about cinema as having a very narrow set of constraints. You know, you sit in the dark in rows and you sit silently and watch something that is entirely tightly controlled, where everything is about the depth of immersion that someone provides you, and in return for the enormous amount of control that you hand to them. You allow them to guide you 24 times a second. You know, Godard's famous quote is, you know, that film is truth 24 times a second. You're given this micro experience. I heard this week on the Guardian have a science podcast about someone who's doing research into eye movement of people who watch film, and he'd been screening a scene from There Will Be Blood where the camera's locked off for several minutes in one kind of key scene, and what he found was there's an incredibly tight correlation of what people actually watched. You know, a large group of people are generally looking in almost exactly the same place on the screen throughout that entire scene, but the director and the actor's ability to move your gaze, even within a locked frame, is very, very tightly controlled. So that is kind of the promise of cinema. So, you know, when you then start saying, oh, well, we're going to do mobile cinema or locative cinema, you're kind of sort of smashing almost everything that we kind of hold, you know, really valuable about cinema. You're promising to hand control over to the public in some way, and you're taking cinema into an inherently chaotic place. You can't know where your viewer is, how they're viewing, not even necessarily what format or size of screen they're looking at. They're going to be pausing it, they're going to be jumping in and out of it. You have a whole number of different challenges, and you know, this has been kind of the kind of central kind of dilemma that we've wrestled with, in particular with this project A Machine to See With, which I'm going to talk about first. the brief was that the commission was advertised as a locative cinema commission, and I have to say that we had never heard of locative cinema. We were like, oh, I wonder what that is, but that sounds very interesting. And then we put together a kind of proposal to send in for this project, and then we heard we'd been shortlisted, and that the potential commissioners wanted to talk to us on the phone, and we were like, what are we going to do if they ask us what locative cinema is? We don't know, and we Googled it, and we still were none the wiser. And very fortunately, in that conversation, no one ever posed the question of, can you just explain to us what, in your terms, locative cinema is? But our interpretation of it was something about the cinematic in the city, how you might have a cinematic experience as you walk through the city. And clearly, one of the things that's interesting about the city is that it's the kind of fundamental language of cinema. In my view, anyway. I think of films and cities as very closely interlinked. They are the city is an inherently sort of cinematic place, and it's a place kind of inscribed with all of these movie cliches, movie tropes over that we've grown up with. So I have that thing where if a large black limousine pulls up next to me, anywhere near me on a street, I expect the window to go down and someone to say, "Get in." It's just like, I can't see the restaurant of a Chinese kitchen without expecting someone to come crashing through it and people to be throwing things in the air. It's just these are the kinds of cliches that we have, and in some sense we carry those with us as we walk through the city. So for this project, we decided quite early on we would use no screens. We decided that actually the cinema is inside your head, and the thing is about how we can invoke that, and how we can kind of set a stage for you to do that. The other thing to say about these location-based projects is, what you're then doing is, rather than just kind of diminishing cinema, you also have this great empowerment, which is you're putting someone in a very particular place in space with a very particular experience, and you need to create some kind of meaningful exchange between where you are and what experience you're having. And that is a very difficult thing to do, because you don't necessarily know where someone is. I'm not sure we've kind of quite resolved that tension. You can be the judge, perhaps. But that's one of the things that we were kind of wrestling with. And so this work, A Machine to See With, it's a bank robbery where you are a robber, and you receive a series of phone calls in the city. You're given a screening time, and you then receive a call that tells you to be in a certain position, certain place at a certain time, and at that time your phone goes, and from there on you're led on a journey through the city towards a bank which you have to plan to rob in some ways. And the experience culminates at the moment that you put your hand onto the door of the bank, and then you're told the thing is off and to walk away. So you're built through this very kind of steep narrative arc that hypes you up. You're invited to stake the bank out. You meet up with a partner. When we did it in Sundance, it was by sitting in a car together. The two of you kind of find a deserted car, and you get in. You have a conversation about how you're going to do it. So it's a very playful experience, but it's also one that really gets your heart racing, because it's a real bank, and you're given a kind of disclaimer at the beginning that says if the police are called, it's your problem. And so you're in this doubt about where the line exists between the fiction and the reality. And that's the other great kind of powerful possibility of these platforms for me, is this ambiguity about where reality and fiction exist. And the very first alternate reality games, as Patrick mentioned, did this brilliantly. The very first ARGs, people genuinely weren't sure what those things were, whether they were games or not. They denied that they were games, and people were hooked completely by that. And then the alternate reality game genre became established, where it became a complete sort of item of faith that you pretended it wasn't a game, even though it became increasingly obvious that it was. And so how you kind of make use of this blur between reality and fiction is a kind of a core resource when you start to think about projects of this kind. So, as I say, you arrive at a street corner, your phone rings. In this first example, you go into a nearby loo, and you're asked to take part in a personality test, and you have to complete a number of questions about your personality using the keypad on your phone. You meet up with your partner, you head to the bank, you plan your robbery. It gets you, these photos are from San Jose, it gets you to the point where you actually have the door, your hand on the door, and then you move away. And I mentioned that It starts from the tropes of the heist movie, and in particular for us, this book, The Jugger, which is a fantastic piece of film noir writing by Richard Stark. And I thought it was worth just showing that quote there from Chris Hedges in The Empire of Illusion, where he talks about how we carry the cinema inside us. We try to see ourselves moving through our life as a camera would see us, mindful of how we hold ourselves, how we dress, what we say. We invent movies that play in our heads. It feels like it's like a guilty secret, but that certainly chimes with me. The Jugger was sort of famously lifted by Jean-Luc Godard for his film Made in the USA, where he didn't ask for permission. And so it wasn't until a few years ago that that Made in the USA was ever even shown in America because of the illegal taking of the plot from the Jugger. But the idea of Godard films, and this one in particular, was a very interesting kind of thing for us because he uses a film noir, sort of straight thriller genre, at the same time as trying to interrogate the Vietnam War, and you're always pushed backwards and forwards across this boundary between this kind of cheap, pulpy kind of story and a sense of very kind of sort of angst-filled and important political questions. And in Godard's film Pierrot le Fou, the actor Jean-Paul Belmondo says, "My eyes are a machine to see with," and that's where the title of the work came from. The other source, which I thought was worth just mentioning, given we are in a documentary film festival, was an unpicking of Bill Clinton's campaign for re-election in 1996, where they started doing a very advanced set of polling. They called it a neuro-personality poll, where they had a phone center set up in Denver where they made thousands of calls every single day to swing voters, asking them every single aspect of the election, but not about their politics, but about their sort of hopes and their fears and their desires and their whims, and whether they liked Bill Clinton's jumper, and whether they were worried about their kids on the school bus, and things like that. And they then built out of this sort of psychological profiling of what was called small ball politics, which was designed to really appeal to your sort of subconscious needs and desires, rather than giving you sort of proper, full-out sort of political and ideological things to choose from. You're invited to vote for things like V-chips in your TV, which would, you know, prevent your children from watching violence and things like that. And the other sort of obvious background to this work is the financial crisis of the last 3 years, and that's really where, you know, where I wanted to try and make a work that in some way dealt with my feeling of complete impotence around the financial crisis. That somehow these people seem to have got away with it, scot-free. You know, 1 or 2 people in the world have gone to prison. We're all paying for it, and, you know, I have a complete disconnect where I can't understand how the anger that I seem to find wherever I talk to people about it, people share that anger. We don't seem to have found a vehicle that enables us to express that, and that, you know, that's a larger question, but a machine to see with attempts to try and invoke some of those feelings. So that sense in which this robbery never takes place and never was going to take place. And in any case, would the Bank of America really care if you took $50,000 out of one of their branches? You know, the days where banks were scared of people like Bonnie and Clyde, you know, those days are over. So that's kind of a key sort of part of the work. I thought it's also worth mentioning that actually, you know, Machine to See With and the second project I'm going to talk about, Ulrike and Eamon Compliant, they kind of offer a set of interaction, a set of forks and things where you've got choices to make. But in reality, behind the scenes, they're very, very tightly linear. And that's partly comes from this cinematic impulse towards giving people a good experience through tight control, and partly because, in reality, most interactive projects are in fact designed like that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that perhaps at the end. You know, I've mentioned a little bit about this borderline between the real and the fictional, and what we try and do is invoke that in some ways through ethical decisions, where you're asked to make decisions and it's not entirely clear whether that's within the framework of the work or whether that's something that's outside in the real world. So you're asked to have an exchange with a stranger at the end of a Machine to See With, and there's a slight, you're not entirely sure whether that's a performer, another participant, or a member of the public. So I'm going to go on now and talk about Ulrike and Eamon Compliant. I should just say that this is a spoiler situation. So if any of you are planning to do it, I apologise. I am going to reveal to you some aspects of that of the work. So, oh, nice going there, Sandy. Okay, so true discipline. There we go.
Excuse the jury members here.
Oh, okay. I don't know whether that's a good thing or bad. Maybe that's what people who hate my presentation, taking their chance to go out with their heads held high. But
They're going off to play blasting.
yeah, maybe they're going now. Yeah.
I go too, but I'm just going to forget.
Yeah.
So.
That's okay. So so this piece of work was made, was commissioned originally for the Venice Biennale, so it had a very particular kind of context. And in this work, you're invited to choose to take the role of either Ulrike Meinhof or Eamon Collins as you take a walk through the city. As I'm sure most of you are familiar with in this room, Ulrike Meinhof was a very well-known journalist in Germany in the 1960s, a star columnist of the left, a regular appearer on German TV, who at a certain moment, for a number of complicated reasons, joined with Andries Baader and Gudrun Ensland to form the Red Army faction and conduct a violent campaign of bank robberies and bombings. She was fairly quickly captured within a couple of years and ended up hanging herself in prison. Eamon Collins is much less well known, but he's here in this work because he wrote this astonishing book called Killing Rage, in which he reflected on his life in the IRA, where he rose to be part of the Nutting Squad, which is the department in the IRA in charge of internal security, and they were an extremely fierce and formidable bunch of people, as you might imagine. Eamon was arrested and turned supergrass, told everything he knew, then revoked his evidence, and the IRA gave him sort of an amnesty, but partly due to writing this book, he was ultimately killed in 1999. So now I'm just going to show a little bit of video from this project.
Hello, it's me. You and I are going on a walk together.
Hello.
Outside, it's 1973.
I'd like to be Eamon.
Hello, Eamon. I'll stay on the line while you walk. Keep your eyes open. Act natural. There's always a first time for this kind of thing, and practice makes it easier. I'm going to count to 10. If you're still on the line when I get to 10, then I'll know where you stand. 1. The two killers ride into Warren Point on a motorbike. 2. They switch the engine off, allowing the bike to glide the last 20 meters so as not to raise the alarm. 3. Once inside, Iceman goes down the corridor into Toombs' office. 4. He takes up a firing position with arms outstretched. 5. His gun jams, giving Toombs enough time to reach for his own weapon. 6. Iceman leaps onto him and the two men struggle. 7. The second gunman comes running down the hall and shouts, "Stand back." 8. Iceman lets go and the second man fires several shots into Toombs. 9. Iceman clears his weapon. 10. He pumps several more rounds into Toombs as he lies dying. 'Don't be shy. It's a question we all have to answer from time to time. And today, it's your turn. What can you do for the people around you?
Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there. So I'm running out of time, so I must move on. But one of the kind of influences on this work is a branch of moral philosophy called trolleyology, or looking at trolley dilemmas, which is putting people in certain ethical positions and asking them how they would behave. And the most famous one is that one I've got up on the screen there, about a train careering down a track out of control and inviting you to decide whether you would kill one person in order to save 5. Philippa Foot was the philosopher who originated that. And so, you know, what we've tried to do in both of these works I've talked about is to put people in positions where your subjectivity is put in relationship to some sort of documentary source, and you're then invited to navigate what would be the correct path. And Ulrike and Eamon Compliant culminates with an interview in a hidden room, and that's the kind of the main spoiler bit that makes a big difference, is that ultimately you go into a room and you sit down, and the first question you're asked is, what would you fight for? And your answer to that then fuels a conversation that takes place within that room. Throughout that work, you're presented as if you are either Ulrike and Eamon, and the idea is that there's an instability between yourself as a participant within this work, or whether you adopt this role, and the extent to which you think, well, actually, I'm just walking through shop in Sheffield city centre, and no, I don't feel in any way like Ulrike Meinhof, or whether, conversely, that you kind of adopt this role. This tension between the kind of fiction, this very highly charged fiction, and the very everyday environment in which it takes place, provides kind of core kind of political thread that runs through the work, because of course the questions that led Ulrike Meinhof and Eamon Collins to behave in which they did started in places like the ones that we're surrounded in. They're grounded in their particular context, and what we've attempted to do is make work that kind of profits from that tension between the cinematic and the everyday. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks so much to Matt. And actually, can someone come find Shari? See if we can get Shari back in the room. So I think, Matt's finished on a sort of a really nice segue from, Shari and Patrick about, I guess, immersive storytelling, site-specific storytelling, and I guess all three are really looking at experimenting with experiences for the audience, and I guess designing experiences, interactive experiences for an audience that, take that audience out of the traditional cinematic space. So perhaps these are threads that we can pick up during question time. But I'd really like to open it up to you if any of you have questions for the speakers, or have any particular threads you'd like to follow. Any questions at the back?
Hello. I really like your work in blast theory. I just wondering how you relate to the theater, because most of your work is a lot about interactive theater. So I want to know how you think the difference between cinema and theater in your work, and if there is a difference or not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I suppose my background is in theatre. That's where I came from, and so and the reason that I got completely thrilled by theatre when I was 13 was going to see a play where I felt the ground rules shift beneath me as I watched it. What I thought was going on in the first act was completely different by the final act. It was a play by J.B. Priestley called An Inspector Calls, and it sort of unpicks the kind of bourgeois veneer of a safe middle class family in a way that to my pubescent eyes was an astonishing thing. And so we are always very that sense in which a live moment can kind of transform what's going on in ways that you're not expecting. is always something that we look to work with within the projects that we make. You know, the fundamentals of theatre, as I see it, are you have 4 elements. You are at a specific moment in time, at a specific place, and you have an audience member and a performer. And once you have any of them, you know, once you have those 4 together, you have a kind of theatrical moment. However, the technologies that have arisen in the last 10 or 15 years reorientate almost every one of those 4 things. All of those things kind of change. And in some of our works, like, for example, say, Rider Spoke, whether you're an audience member or a performer really changes from moment to moment. You know, you can be an audience member for one person and simultaneously be performing for someone else within the work, and so on and so forth. You know, the notion of time and space, the internet has really changed that sort of thing. You have all kinds of distributed performances, telematic performances, and so on. So, you know, that sense of live performance is always a kind of touchstone for our work. And you know, whether it's cinematic or not is harder to say. You know, I don't have a background as a filmmaker, but I do have a particular interest in the ways in which the cinematic frames your experience. So you know, there's some sort of hybrid there. I suppose that's one of the great sort of great things about working in the slightly sort of marginal areas that we work in, that you don't have to define yourself too tightly.
Well, you know, when I had to sell a machine to see to my colleagues, and they're like, you know, where's the moving image in this?
Yeah, good luck. How did that go?
Well, by expanding the notion of cinematic landscape to incorporate surveillance cameras, to incorporate the cinematic language, and honestly, I mean, you know, we were able to kind of to buy into it, you know, and the work actually delivered it in terms of linking, you know, physically and imaginatively to a cinematic gaze. But really the proof was in the pudding and how it played at Sundance, because it completely connected to the film audience there. And they really understood this as a cinematic language. And not one person asked, why is this here? There's no moving image. Not one person asked that. Yeah.
I think perhaps just on that question, I'd be really interested perhaps to hear a bit more from you, Shari, about, I guess, your transition from film to an engagement with sort of more interactive work. And I mean, and how, I guess perhaps that's shifted your perception and I guess how you know, relate to audiences in terms of, you know, especially film audiences coming to you from film.
I guess it was never really a transition.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a filmmaker and artist, and I started working, my artistic practice was with collage and then making parts of the collage move, you know, by embedding screens inside of it, you know. And kind of grew up more through, you know, showing work in gallery spaces, and then starting to, you know, taking those bits of video and making single channel properties out of them and actually showing them at film festivals. So I've always kind of had a foot in both worlds, and have had the fortune to develop that sensibility within my festival work. You know, through Mix, which was an experimental festival that had actually full reign, you know, because I was the director there, and I was able to always incorporate a showcase of artists that were engaging with, you know, at that time CD-ROM, you know, this was the 90s, to you know, Outfest, where you know, that's really more when I started to engage with the performance element of it, with Ron Avey and Vaginal Davis, and what we did with the Platinum Oasis. So it's always kind of been there. And it kind of feels like I've been working and seeing this work on not the margins, but across the room from one another. And now that we have this new landscape, it's a mainstream landscape, there is a new connection of these worlds that's quite unprecedented and very exciting. And I imagine it's going to not only generate new works, but also excavate old works and sensibilities to kind of re-emerge in different ways.
Yeah. Any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, I wonder whether
there's a microphone.
in your Ulrike, have you, not with that particular project, but in other projects, for example, have you thought about integrating ways in which those who are following on their mobile devices can also input on their mobile devices? In other words, to feed back into a general, maybe overall, citywide simultaneous experience where they are, and where they are, the images becoming part of the information that's available to all. The other, also there's I mean, you mentioned having had a seminal moment when you were 13 with this. I too had one probably when I was 13, much before you were 13, with a company called Lanterna Magica, which I don't know whether it was a Czech company that toured for a while, and it was a company that brought cinema, but then people, the actors, the performers actually emerged from the cinema, from the moving images to being real images, and then moved back and forth. So this was a very early example of this kind of interaction and engagement. Also, another theater kind of experience that fits in here in your terminology, in your thought, is when an audience is forced to make a decision about which character, for example, they follow in a play, which has been done numerous times in various examples. I wonder whether any of those ideas have been integrated as well, or if you're thinking about how those might be integrated in the future.
Yes, so we have made projects where the public contribute. The project I mentioned, Rider Spoke, is a work for cyclists where you make recordings as you cycle through the city and build up a kind of palimpsest of recordings, and there are lots of great examples of projects that have done that. I'm thinking of, there's a project called Murmur that was done in Canada originally that's beautiful in terms of capturing those sorts of things. People really enjoy it. Everyone's favourite subject is themselves, let's be honest. And so interactive works that capture that can do very interesting things. What you have to do in order to incorporate that breadth of participation is open the gate very wide, because you can't have something that's exclusive or that's narrowing of people's frame of reference. You can't make assumptions about what people know or don't know. And so what we found was that work that school of work, both in terms of the work we've created and works that I've experienced, takes you so far, but not much further. And that's why we've moved in more recent periods to making work that's more explicitly political. We look sort of very political in terms of the two projects I presented, but we really weren't making work that had an explicit political agenda for many, many years, and we were seen as kind of slightly ditzy game people for a while, because lots of the work we made was about connecting people in various forms of play. But these works, partly we've become interested in how you author an experience that's quite determined, and partly we want to take a critique of this fashion around interactivity, where it's bound up with the kind of rhetorics of empowerment and even democracy, as if we've made an interactive work that's inherently on a higher level than the films that you guys are making, because ours is all about democracy and empowerment. And it's like, that is really a very, very flawed and problematic argument. And partly I see these projects as a kind of critique of interaction itself, as an artistic platform. That the interaction needs to be very, very clearly understood, because it is ideologically inscribed. When you set up an interactive structure, you're making decisions about what the rules are, what can be done, and as you do that, your own values are hardwired into the projects that you make.
Any other questions? Perhaps Patrick, I'll ask you a question. Perhaps you can sort of, take that up a bit in terms of, I guess, the challenges you face in terms of interactivity and audience engagement, and I guess, how that's challenging you as a company, and
well, we've, as I said, we've experimented in some ways, made a name for ourselves as working in niche but exciting genres such as alternate reality gaming. And there's something at the core of that experience that's very much linked to the idea of immersion and being transported into within the story space, transcending the screen through your imagination, that is very exciting. And what we've tried to do over time, and what I was trying to plot the trajectory of in some of the work I was presenting, is perhaps to show how we went from doing something that was very niche, that was getting critical interest, but actually very, very small audience in the world that's really into that stuff. And the tension, or that when I say that stuff, I mean hardcore gamers of that nature, who are brilliant, exciting people who are fascinated by that boundary between the screen, the real world, your imagination, and how to transcend that in new form drama. I think one of the tensions we always discovered was playing to that crowd, which is as a mainstream filmmaker, storyteller, producer, it can lead you off topic or off target, off your target market. It can. We always found that was they challenged us, they gave us ideas, but once we started playing to them, we were going far away from a mainstream audience. Which, if you're creating mainstream media, I mean, the tension between those can be a good thing, but it has to be carefully managed. And what we've tried to do is always maintain a core of hardcore gameplay, the Easter eggs that are always there in our fiction that can be found, but that are not part of the main gameplay, because it would shut out most of the audience. And our challenge increasingly has been to look at, well, can we adapt that for a middle of the road audience? And I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. The project I showed for you guys, Empire of the Word, was really actually designed for an audience, for a network whose target demographic is 45 and up. Yeah. And where a technology uptake is quite different. So I'm sure our hardcore audience of Argers, if they ever found it, would have thought this was pathetic. But it's a real challenge. One of the things in our work that's exciting, at least, is to see the uptake with kids and with young people and how they transcend the screen and media. It's such a joy to actually see it happen.
The digital natives.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I was looking at Inside Hannah's Suitcase, which is a digital doc we did with some members of my family who don't even know how to navigate an environment. It's just, they have no idea, and you show it to the kids and they're all over it, and that's exciting, and that gives me hope that what we're doing is really will have legs in the future as a format.
Maybe we'll take a couple of quick questions. I think it's getting to lunchtime, so I think. Oh, maybe at the front here then.
I have a quick question for Shari. Adam G in the earlier panel was talking about how important, he's from Channel 4, is working across different departments in a bigger organisation. Do you think there's some really interesting opportunities within Sundance, with the film festival, with the Institute, and how you really develop and nurture storytellers to do more work that feeds your programme at New Frontier and really pushes that out to a wider audience through your network, through kind of cinema distribution, that side of things?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's actually happening. The feature film labs, which actually were kind of the first program of the Institute to help develop filmmakers in their projects. Michelle Satter was inspired by New Frontier to start a New Frontier Story Lab. And we're going to have a beta lab in the fall. And we're actively pursuing this right now, trying to get funding and building a tracking list of artists to help. And this one will be a kind of a project-specific lab to help artists who have ideas for transmedia projects or projects that will be platformed across platforms to develop that work. Yeah.
Another question there.
Really question. film that everybody knows that's a kind of a standard documentary? I can't think of one that you would all have seen or know, but I would suggest, for example, Restrepo or something like that. That's sort of a hardcore verite documentary. How would you suggest that a filmmaker who's making a film like that and starts out with a premise to make a film like that and is following that kind of production, how could they extend the reach, their scope, the impact of their film by using some form of gaming? Can you suggest a kind of a scenario for doing that? I don't know, pick a film, any film. Restrepo came to my mind, but maybe there's another that would be better suited. Could you do that for us?
It's quite a big question. I haven't seen Restrepo, but you know, I think it's about thinking carefully about what an audience member, what other kind of experience you can offer them. Now, with documentary, I often find that there's less information presented than I am interested in, because it's for a mainstream audience and it's tidied up and it's got to deliver in a certain period of time and there's a lot of time on the emotional arcs and all that sort of stuff. And you know, in the process of making those projects, there is more information than can be put on screen. And that's like the very simple kind of levels of extension. In terms of the works that, you know, the sort of further ultimate goal, I think, is about how, as I've kind of sort of talked about with our work, how you can immerse people in a situation where you start to put them in a position of being able to act in a situation, and or give them choices that are meaningful in some ways. And we're at the very earliest stages of that. You know, it's been a huge discussion in the games industry for years and years and years of whether it'll ever be able to be a mature and intelligent proper art form like the film people, which is of course, you know, what they desperately hope to be. And that is beginning, you know, those tools are beginning to take place. You know, most software is quite limited in what it does, and it's not an accident that most games are still focused around physics of one kind or another, because computers are very good at doing physics and they're not very good at doing political scenario exploration or something like that. But you know, those would be the kinds of trajectories that I think we're on. Is you know, that you end up in a situation where, you know, the fantasy situation would be that you could play through the late 1960s as Ulrike and Eamon in a fully realised, immersive, comprehensive, plausible picture of Germany in the late 1960s. You know, that would be the kind of fantasy project that I would do alongside the work that we're doing.
How does this differ from something like Second Life? I mean, how do you, what's the distinction?
Second Life has no content in it whatsoever. It's just a place that people wander around and look at each other's avatars and chat and simulate sex occasionally. You know, it's like it's a very, very vapid space, and that's why Second Life is on a downward trajectory.
There was a documentary called Molotov Alba, you know it? It's a documentary in which, I'm sorry, am I talking too much?
Not for me.
But it's a documentary in which an avatar was, a man who was looking for God, projected himself as an avatar and went through Second Life on a mission. It's a documentary. It's very strange. There have been a couple of documentaries like that that have actually taken place in virtual reality. I mean, these are kind of issue-oriented filmmaking projects that manifest themselves in a virtual reality way. Where do you...
I mean, all I would add to that is to say we're all learning and that no one knows. You know, there is no definitive answer, you know, and you can see, you know, comparing our work to the work that Xenophile make. Xenophile are absolutely groundbreaking in their sector, because the question is, people have said for years and years, well, this is all very well, but, you know, the average viewer is not going to be interested in this. This is like a niche, kind of trendy little sort of thing for a digital, like, enclave. You know, and what Xenophile have done is distinctive is say, well, no, actually, you could do this for everybody, and you can make it work. And so, you know, we're coming at the same problem from opposite ends. And you know, no one knows. You know, the number of good projects that do this is very few and far between. You know, it's like we're all making mistakes head over heels as we try and, you know, navigate through this. That, you know, you can kind of conceive of various possibilities, but it's you know, it's far from a stable place, which is why it's an interesting place to be operating.
I'd like to respond to, you know, that challenge you put out there, because we've made two, well, 2 or 3 actually, interactive documentaries over the last few years, depending on what you call an interactive documentary. The most conventional of the two you saw, Inside Hannah's Suitcase, which is a theatrical feature documentary, which is for a general adult audience. And then we created an interactive version of it that's aimed more specifically at kids, with explorable environments and enhanced information, and responds very much to what you were saying, Matt, about how do you put the extra information, which to a certain degree, I think for conventional filmmakers, that's the most obvious thing, right? Where do we put all our research material crap? You know, oh yeah, we can throw that online. Of course you can't, that's very uninteresting to look at people's research notes, you know, unless you're a real fan. So really it's a very careful process of reorganizing or organizing or bringing new elements into an interactive metaphor that can be experienced differently. Of course, a film's typically a kind of essayist statement, a documentary film with a hypothesis that is then proven. So, you know, that still has to be taken into account in interactive documentaries that are basically a version of a linear document. But I think the things we've made like that, another project called BeethovensHair.ca, which, or Beethoven's Hair, based on Beethoven's Hair, the film. What Beethoven's Hair, the film, is a forensic mystery through time that goes back and forth through time over 3 centuries, charting a lock of hair that was cut from the head of the composer on his deathbed, and all the people who owned it over the centuries and how it changed their lives. And just like a film, it goes back and forth through time, you know, proceeding with its A, B, and C stories to an eventual conclusion. But we spent a lot of time reinventing it as a telescoping timeline in real time that you can navigate through yourself, which is a different way of experiencing it, and which has found huge uptake in the school system, actually, which is really interesting to see. And a very long tail life after the film itself has mainly gone through conventional distribution. I want to just on that note, though, I've been really, really inspired. I'm sure you've heard other people mention it during the course of this event, by some of the work that is being done at the National Film Board of Canada, specifically a project called Out My Window, or High Rise, which I encourage you all to go and look at on nfbc.ca, the National Film Board site. And it's it's wonderful portraits of people living in high-rise developments in many cities around the world. The initial navigation is a little difficult, but once you get into it, it's they're a curated 360 environments that you can click around and learn about people's response to their environment. But these act as clusters around which user-generated content agglomerates. And to me, I was very excited when I saw this demoed recently, because to me it really offers a new model for what a documentary can and should be, which is a focus for an engaged debate that is inspired by a filmmaker and taken up by the audience. I mean, that's what events like this provoke, right? And when something's on TV, and what the water cooler conversation is about. But this offers a structure by which that conversation can exist in one environment and be enhanced and grow.
Okay, I think we've got to stop now on Patrick's excitement, on Patrick's exciting moment, and
it's just caffeine.
And you know, and I think what's been evident through the 3 speakers is that there, you know, artists and practitioners have been experimenting in this field for several years now, and it is sort of becoming mainstream, and that I think we're going to see a lot more of this type of work at DocFest and much more sort of broadly in the sort of cinematic landscape. So as we sort of finish today, Shari's going to play another clip from Lawrence wider pandemic, but I'd like to thank all of you for being here this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of DocFest, and please give our speakers a big hand. Thanks also to Todd and the tech team as well.
I thought it was worth to address your question of how does a filmmaker actually expand the story world? And I realized I didn't show the second clip. I showed the first clip of film that he made that sets the tone in the world. But this 3-minute clip shows how then he went ahead and expanded that world into the game.
Pandemic 1.0 is a kind of a participatory storytelling project. The concept is you have 120 hours to stop a pandemic. So in order to do so, people online work with people in the real world to unlock a variety of things that we've hidden throughout Park City. At the heart of Pandemic 1.0, we have 20 different characters. We scripted them all through Twitter. So that what we give to the actors is 100 tweets for their character over a 5-day period. And they work from that, and then they improvise around those tweets. So we release those tweets programmatically, and they'll come out at different times. And then we'll interject bits of these fragments of their story that we shoot scenes with that's happening in real time. The scenes that we shoot, we'll stage them in secret locations.
I guess if you search Lance.
Yeah, you can do if you do Pandemic 1.0 New Frontier Lance Weiler, you could probably get. So this is this video clip. So this is the only one that I think that's happened. Turnstile Video is actually the best clip of coverage of this piece. But I guess it's worth it to say, conversations with him about this very
location. People then can go to where we shot, and then they're encouraged to leave things, artifacts.
I'll leave you to look at it. But he mentions, when you're writing a story, and all of the research that goes into it, and the backstories that you write, these actually are the script for the larger story world, but that can be transported into the different platforms, and that's another mode by which you can expand a story into a story world.
Okay. Thanks again, everyone. And,